Hello, my name is Alejandro Roark, and I'm the Executive Director for Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership. ATTP is a CEO roundtable of 16 of the country's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organizations who work in coalition to promote the access, adoption, and the full utilization of technology and telecommunications resources by the Latino community across the United States. Through our community engagement, congressional education, and by serving as a national voice for Latinos in tech and telecom policy, ATTP member organizations work to support the social, political, and economic advancement of Americans of Latino descent by facilitating access to high-quality education, economic opportunity, and effective healthcare through the use of technology tools and resources. As the nature of work changes, so has the workplace. Work, as we have known it in every sector of the American economy, is being disrupted by new and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, robotics, and big data. Traditional employment is beginning to look more and more like gig work with unpredictable work schedules and more uncertain working conditions and compensation. These changes have broad implications that are fueling deep economic anxiety, magnified by already existing deeply embedded structural inequalities. What's worse is that as today's labor market continues to change, our workforce policies and support systems have failed to keep up with the changing nature of employment and employer-worker arrangements. Many types of workers are affected by these seismic changes, from the creative professional working gig to gig, to the retail or restaurant worker, the home care worker who is negotiating price and availability with customers through an app, the construction worker, or the long-haul trucker worried about a future of driverless vehicles. But these changes are not impacting everyone equally. Women, people of color, immigrants, and people with disabilities disproportionately bear the brunt of a potential displacement, which exacerbates inequality overall. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Adrian Haro, CEO of the Workerslab, to our kitchen table conversations on race, technology, and the future of everything. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Adrian, you spent your career kind of helping people and building organizations. You've done that as a field organizer for President Obama, as a speechwriter for U.S. Labor Secretary Hilda Solis, and now in your current role as the CEO of the Workerslab, you work to promote a society where workers are powerful drivers of economic, political, and social transformation by bringing together, public, private, and nonprofit leaders to test new ideas to improve the lives of workers. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about maybe your personal background and your passion for building worker power and about the work that you're leading at the Workerslab?
Absolutely, Alejandro. And thank you again for having me. And just hearing all of that terrific work that you just listed, I'm really happy to be a part of this and really proud to be a part of this conversation. So my name's Adrian. I'm the CEO at the Workerslab, where our purpose is to give new ideas about increasing power for workers a chance to succeed and to flourish. I started at the Workerslab in 2017 as our managing director, supporting the vision of our founder, Carmen Rojas. And really at that time, the Workerslab was a fiscally sponsored project of a larger foundation. Super scrappy startup. We didn't know if it was going to go anywhere or become a thing, and it has. And so over the last 3 or so years have really worked to build this organization from scratch. Everything from building out our terrific programs to a budget, a benefit strategy, payroll, all of that stuff, which is a lot of work. Anybody who's ever started anything knows that building something is a lot of luggage, let me tell you. But the one thing that, but I've never gotten tired, right? The one thing that I love about this job is that I get to do it all in service of making the lives of working people better. And that is really special to me. Mostly because of where I grew up and how I grew up. So I grew up on the east side of Los Angeles. I actually just moved back here. It's a little town called Pico Rivera, California. And Mexicans live here. Mexican Americans live here. And at a very young age, I had the example through my mother of service and was pretty intense about service as a kid. And it never left. It is the reason why I have done everything you just read about in my bio and continue to do today in service of making the lives of working people better. My passion for this stuff, this issue really does come from my parents. both immigrants from Guadalajara, Mexico. My dad was a janitor for most of my life, and my mom was a seamstress. And we always had everything we needed, right? But I knew that it took a lot, and they worked really, really hard to make sure that I had what I needed. And so I don't take that for granted at all. And I think about that almost every day in this job when I'm thinking about how best to serve all of the workers that you talked about in your intro, which, as you know, given the global pandemic, are experiencing a really undignified amount of burden and pain at this moment.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing a little bit of your backstory. You know, as technology continues to disrupt the way that we know work to be in every industry, you know, it also kind of carries with it the possibility of creating new industries, occupations, and jobs. Specifically, I think when we think about the disability community, technology has the potential to increase human productivity as well as job quality, but maximizing this potential really requires us to reimagine workplace policies, regulations, standards, and to innovate business practices so that they are increasing, you know, both the quality of work and bringing with it higher levels of economic security. So these are fundamental questions that you are working to answer at the Workerslab by bringing together, you know, workers and their advocates, private sector partners, and policymakers, you know, in an effort to kind of generate new ideas and promote action. So could you share a little bit about what that process looks like and about some of the ideas that you've invested in as a part of your design sprints?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mentioned our purpose as an organization earlier, and I'll say it again because it's so great. Our purpose is to give new ideas about increasing worker power a chance to succeed and to flourish. And if you think about that purpose, what it's really premised on is the idea that there isn't enough innovation happening in service of working people, and in particular, low-wage working people, largely of color, right? And so we give new ideas for them and from them a chance. And we do that primarily as an intermediary funder through two core programs. The first is our signature program called the Innovation Fund, which is a grant competition that we host 3 times a year, really to like put out a big call and say like, what is out there, right? To sort of cast a super wide net around new ideas and innovation taking root all over the country in service of working people. We throw those ideas through a competition and then we fund them. The second programs, like you mentioned, Alejandro, are these design sprints that we do. We started doing them in partnership with Google. Indeed, the design sprint methodology is something that came out of Google Ventures. And so it's essentially a process to get a product to market, a tech solution to market very quickly. And so we've taken that methodology inside the Workerslab and have applied it to a social change goal, building a piece of tech that aims to serve the purpose of making people's lives better. We've done that last year. Our first one, we did it on creating the first of its kind sort of emergency cash platform to serve gig workers. We did that pre-COVID, and then suddenly COVID happened. And as you might imagine, given the sort of focus on emergency cash, the learnings from that design sprint became really important. And the technology became really important, right? How do you use technology to serve workers in ways that we've never had to serve workers before? And we were really fortunate to be able to lean on all of those learnings. I mentioned the Innovation Fund. Inside, more like I love the programs, but what I love the most about working here at the Workerslab is our values. Really, we are a majority, first generation, person of color, queer organization. And while, that's really important, it sounds super cool, but it's really, really important for 2 reasons. First, it sort of disrupts the notion of who's typically equipped to do innovation, right? As we see it, it is not a white tech bro in the Silicon Valley. In fact, 74%, the vast majority of the people that we give money to, the innovators on the ground, are people of color, and very specifically women of color. So we wear that with a badge of honor because it's important. It's important that we show employers, policymakers, public sector leaders, folks in the social sector who's best equipped because of their proximity and because of their lived experiences as Latinos or as other communities of color, who's best equipped to actually solve problems in this country? And as we see it, it's people who look like me and you.
Yeah, no, I thank you again for kind of sharing that. I didn't really know how intentional I think you were in the way that you kind of crafted your team. And I think that it really, helps to minimize a lot of the blind spots that many of the innovations and solutions kind of have out there, right? Because they are kind of created by people that maybe don't have a personal connection to working people like you and me, like our parents, like immigrant communities. So I think, as we kind of talk about this idea of digital inclusion, the term itself kind of clearly conveys that there are people and places that have been historically excluded from the benefits of digital opportunity. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, do you mind sharing a little bit about, how do you think that we got here? Who do you think is most impacted? And how are you working with industry leaders and policymakers to build new pathways towards greater worker participation and power, specifically within the decision-making process, right? Or the innovation process?
Yeah, it's a good question and a big question. The answer, I feel like, could go on forever, but I'll do my best to keep it brief. In terms of how we got here, the great debate, right? But like for me, it's really personal, right? Like my parents, I mentioned, they're in their late 70s now. My parents came here at a time when we as a country were truly committed to show what dignity while working looked like, right? That job of the past where like you got a job and you had health benefits and you could go on vacation for a week. You had health insurance, right? It's not always the story you hear now, right? But that's how it was here. That was the deal when you got here and worked here, by and large, in and around the 1970s. And as I see it, that's when things started to change, right? Choices were made by people in power that really started to close off opportunity for working people. And those choices have I don't need to say this, but like have adversely affected Latinos and other communities of color in really deep and longstanding ways. And so I believe how we got here was a series of choices. The first was about corporate greed, right? Leaders of corporations began to untether their fates as a business with the fates of their workers, right? Fractured it. The second choice, as I see it, was about the role of our government. Politicians, corporate leaders, academics chose to advance what I believe was an aggressive project to delegitimize the role of government in this country. I went to college on a Pell Grant, right? My whole life, I would not be here if it wasn't for government. I believe deeply in its role. The third choice, as I see it, was about one, to decimate labor unions. Worker power was sort of begun to see as like a liability, right? And so 30% of working people were members of unions in the 1960s. That was 18% in the 1980s, 14% in the early 2000s. And today, barely 10% of working people are members of unions. So what were we left with because of all of that, right? The mass globalization of our jobs, of American jobs, wage stagnation, and, a really big, steep decline in organized labor, which has contributed, there was a time, Alejandro, when work in this country was seen as a vehicle for participation in our democracy, right? And certainly it is no longer, that is no longer the case. And that decline in labor union membership, I think, has contributed largely to that. And I'll wrap by just saying that, like, if I think that how we got here was a series of choices that were, let's just give them anti-worker choices, then certainly it's time to make new choices. And to get to the last part of your question, how can we do that? How do we interact with sort of actors, people in power across industries and sectors? Our role is to give those folks proof by funding the work that we fund, even if it's a little bit, that things can look and be different in this country as it pertains to our economy, as it pertains to how workers live in this country. And like I said, then that's like a nice tie into the purpose, right? And so we work every day to give new ideas a chance, and then to share the learnings from those ideas with all of those folks that you mentioned in your question.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think with everything that you guys are doing at the Workerslab, and I think to your kind of thoughtful attention to the process and the voices that you're bringing into it, right? Because you're absolutely right that as work is being disrupted, right? As we're now kind of like living in the benefits of being able to say, you know what, maybe I do want to, be a gig worker and I get to set my own hours and I get to work and balance my life however I want. But that also kind of raises questions of how do I pay taxes? How do I have access to healthcare? What kind of safety net programs are going to protect me as an employee or as a worker, right, against abuses on the job, against, I think, quick and rapidly changing or evolving wages, right? I think because at this point, if you're a kind of a gig worker, the platform can say, hey, based on the factors of this moment, where your compensation is being cut in half, right? Or we're going to give you a tip, or we're going to increase it, right? And it makes it a lot more difficult for people to kind of plan their lives, right? To plan for the future. And so I think that, I'm really kind of grateful for the fact that you guys are exploring these questions and making sure that workers themselves, communities of color, are at the table to ensure that, we really are kind of rethinking that the future of work isn't just about more efficiency, greater automation, and maybe the potential of displaced workers, but that we're saying that, the nature of work changes, that we really should be, I think, coming up with new solutions about the way that we take care of those of that workforce, whether they're plugged in full time, part time, or if they're a part of the gig economy. So, Adrian, thank you so much for such a great conversation. And thank you to everyone that's watching at home. I think if you have questions, please make sure to follow Adrian Haro and the Workerslab on Twitter and on social media. Please tune into their work. I will make sure to link their information and links to their programs in the description below. And please make sure to also follow HTTP on our social channels at HTTP Policy to be the first to hear about our upcoming conversations presented as a part of this year's Digital Inclusion Summit. Until then, please remember to tune into the conversation, to speak out, and to stay connected, because the future needs all of our help. So until then, see you next time.